Astrophiles. This is Pat Cosgrove welcoming you to Cosgrove's Cosmos. Today I'll be sharing with you my latest imaging project, Melotte 15, also known as the Heart of the Heart. This image was the result of 5.5 hours of narrowband subs, 5 minutes each, which were captured on the evenings of October 21st and 22nd. In this segment, I will be sharing the high-level processing strategy for this imaging project, but I'll also be experimenting with the color versus luminance processing approach, where I'm going to be creating two alternative versions of a starless luminance image, one that has been aggressively processed to bring out and enhance as much as detail and sharpness as possible, and another one where I'm taking a more selective approach where certain elements are sharpened in a strategic fashion. We'll see how these two approaches can differ. Let's get started. This is the third project that resulted from data captured on the evenings of October 21st and 22nd. The other two consisted of IC1396A, which is the elephant's trunk, and NGC 7635, the bubble nebula. I shot this image with my Williams Optics 132mm FLT APO refractor. Mounted on it was the ZWO ASI1600MM-Pro mono camera. The entire OTA was mounted on an IOptron CEM60 Mount. Like my previous two efforts, this image was captured as a series of narrowband 5-minute subs. A total of 5.5 hours was collected before everything was shut down due to illness. Have you ever heard of Melotte 15 or the Heart of the Heart? If not, then some explanation is in order. IC 1805 is known as the Heart Nebula. It's a pretty well-known target. I shot it myself about a year ago in November of 2021. At that time, I used my 400mm astrograph, which had a sufficiently wide field to contain the entire target. However, this time around, I'm shooting with my Williams Optics 132mm, and its field of view would not be able to contain the entire target. So instead, I am focusing on a central area, which is an interesting cluster, open cluster of stars and some very structured nebulosity, which is very intriguing to see. This smaller area of interest was perfectly sized for the smaller field of view of the Williams Optics 132 platform. Given that this is my third project in a row that consisted of 5-minute narrowband subs, it shouldn't be surprising that the processing strategy I'm going to use for this project is identical to the other two. Now, like my other videos, I could walk step by step through the high-level processing flow, but it would be so similar to the other two, I decided not to do that this time. Instead, I'd like to share with you an experiment that I did. The processing workflow that I've been using is based on the idea of a separate processing flow for the luminance channel and for the color channel. And since we're dealing with starless processing, these images are starless until very late in the processing flow when stars are finally added back in. In this processing approach, the luminance channel is processed to maximize detail and sharpness. The color image is processed to maximize color and to have a nice smooth minimal noise image. When you look at each of these images alone, they both lack something that the other path has. When you combine the two by folding the luminance image into the color image, you end up with an image which in some ways is the best of both worlds. Since all the sharpness and detail in the final image is inherited from the luminance image, this made me think a little bit. How far could you take this? How aggressive could you be in processing the luminance image to enhance the detail and the sharpness that it has? Could you be super aggressive in processing that, counting on the fact that when you fold it together with the very smooth and somewhat featureless color image, that the two will average out and produce an even better image? Or is it better to create a luminance image which has a more selective approach, where the enhancement of detail and sharpness is done strategically with a light hand and somewhat focused towards key elements of the image. So I decided to do that experiment. I decided to create two versions of the luminous starless image. The first one would be processed in a very aggressive fashion, doing every trick I knew to bring out as much sharpness and detail across the entire image as possible. The second one would be done with a much more selective approach, where certain key elements of the image would be enhanced, and they would be enhanced but not super aggressively. We would end up with two different ways of trying to create and display the sharpness in the luminance image. If we do both of those, we can fold them back into the color image and assess which one was more successful. So that's what I thought I would try in this particular project and what I'd like to highlight with the remainder of this video. Let's see what that looked like.
I've been using this chart for a while now to show the high-level view of the processing workflow that I've been using for my recent projects. Since the last three projects have been very similar, the processing has been almost identical. And this one, rather than stepping through all the way through the chart as I have been in the past, I think that would be a little redundant. I'm going to focus on the luminance processing path. While I will show how I process the color SHO image, I'm going to primarily focus on this luminance path, the creation of the luminance image, the deconvolution, and the processing done on it to establish the sharpness and detail level. We're going to be doing this twice. The first time we'll be taking a very aggressive approach. First, we need to create a synthetic luminance image, and we're going to do that by taking the master linear images for all three filters and combining them. This combination is going to be done by the image integration tool. We'll load in the three master images, we'll set things up for an average integration, and we'll disable rejection. Image integration will combine these by using a weighting scheme that it will compute. And here we can see that the highest weighting has been put on the sulfur 2, next on the hydrogen alpha, and finally on the oxygen 3. Here is the resulting synthetic luminance image. When you look at them in comparison with all four images, the three master images and one computed, I think it's a good representation of the informational content of the other three channels. Next, while we're still in linear space, we're going to do deconvolution. In order to do that, there are several things we have to do in preparation. First, we'll create our PFS image. And to do that, I'm using the script tool, PFS image. I tend to use this tool in its default mode. And here is the resulting PFS image that we'll be using with deconvolution. Next, we'll create our local de-ringing support image, which is basically a star map of the brightest stars. To use that, we'll use the star mask tools, and you can see the parameters here that I set into the tool to create the initial map. Here is the resulting LDSI map. It's important to make sure that the stars here cover the actual stars in the image. In order to do that, I use the histogram tool in a boost configuration like here, which I apply to the image, which grows the size of the stars. Next, it's important to check. Here we've applied the mask to the image, and we're showing the mask on the image. When we look at the stars, we can see that the mask size of the stars is a little bit smaller than the actual stars. So we're going to need to adjust that. That adjustment is done in this case by using that boost function. Once again, as a matter of fact, I applied it 3 times. This swelled the size of the stars such that they now seem to fit pretty well. Next, we need to select some preview regions on the image that we'll use for iterative testing of various parameters in the deconvolution tool to see which ones seem to work best. Here's what I chose. I try to get some areas that are bright, some areas that are dark, and certainly some areas where there's detail that I want to try to restore. After some iterative testing, I settled on the parameters you see in the deconvolution panel here. Note that since I am not using a luminance mask to protect the low signal areas, I'm using the regularization parameters in order to do that protection. Here is a zoomed in version of the image before we've applied decon. And here's what it looks like after deconvolution has been applied. You'll note that the stars were diminished in size and there's a slight sharpening of the nebulosity. At this point, we're ready to go nonlinear. And because I might end up using the stars from the Luminance image as the main stars add back in, I've decided to use the mask stretch to go into the nonlinear domain, thus preserving the stars and preventing bloating. I follow this up with a modest tweak of the tone scale using the curves tool, and now I have my nonlinear image. At this point, I'm ready to go starless, and I'm going to use Star Exterminator for that. Note that I have the Generate Star Image box checked and the Unscreen Stars checked. And here is my resulting starless image. And here is the stars only version. Now we can start our aggressive enhancement of the image. We'll start that by applying a curves tool to increase the contrast. Next, I'm going to create a luminance mask that I can use to target some of the operations. I'll start by just making a simple copy of the starless luminance image. Next, I'll aggressively boost the contrast with a histogram tool. I follow this up with the application of the convolution tool to soften up the mask a little bit. And with one final application of the curves tool, I have my final luminance mask. Now I can use this luminance mask to target the background for some noise reduction while protecting the detail of the higher signal levels. I can then invert that mask, and now I have the focus on the areas I'd like to have greater detail on, and I can apply some aggressive sharpening there. Here is a zoomed in version of the image before we've applied Noise Exterminator. Here's after we've applied Noise Exterminator using the mask so that we're protecting the high signal areas. Now we've inverted the mask, and now we're doing an MLT sharpening. At this point, I'm going to apply a series of local histogram equalization operations over the entire image. I'm going to do the first one so that goes after medium level detail enhancement. Then I'm going to apply it again, set up so that we're going after a small level detail. And then I'm going to do it a third time where we're enhancing higher scale, larger scale detail. Here's a small scale detail enhancement, followed by the large scale detail enhancement. And here we have the final aggressive version of the Luminance starless image. Now we're going to do this again using a lighter touch and a more selective approach. We'll start off with a common starting point, which is the luminance image just after we went starless. Since we want to be more selective, instead of applying operations to the entire image, I want to create a mask which isolates certain areas of interest. To do that, I'm going to create a mask with the game script, which will take a series of elliptical gradients that are strategically placed to focus our attention where we want it. As I apply this mask to the image, you can see the areas that I'm really wanting to go after and focus our enhancements on. With our mask in place, we do the medium scale enhancement, which is basically a local histogram equalization with the same parameters we used in the first approach. We're just isolating which areas it's operating on. Now we'll do the small scale detail enhancement, followed by the larger scale detail enhancement. Since my goal here is to take a lighter touch, this time around I'm just going to do some noise reduction, and I'm not going to do any aggressive sharpening, and we'll leave it at that. And now we've applied Noise Exterminator with a value of 0.6, which takes down the noise without really impacting the sharpness. At this point, we're pretty much done with our processing of this version of the image. And here we have the final version of the more selective detail enhancement. So now we have two different versions of our L starless image. Let's compare them and see what the differences are in the two approaches. When looking at both images side by side, you can see that there's substantial differences. With the aggressive approach, we definitely were successful in bringing out a much greater level of sharpness and detail. But perhaps it's too much. The background looks very mottled and noisy, and the sharpness looks somewhat unnatural. When I look at the version that was more selective, it looks more natural. It looks smoother where you would like it to be smooth, and you see detail where you wish to see detail. Just looking at those two images, you might make the conclusion that the one that was more selective would be more successful. But we really don't know that, because what we really need is to combine these with the color starless image, folding this in to represent the neutral contribution to that image, and then see what the final result looks like. Until we know how it combines with our color image, we don't know which one will really give us the best results. So to really judge these two versions of the L starless image, we really need to create the color SHO image that we're going to use to combine it to. So let's take a look at what that process looks like and what the end result is that we'll be working with. We'll pick up with the processing of the SHO color image at the point where we've taken the master images over to the nonlinear domain. And here we can see our three starting images. At this point, I've tweaked those three images, adjusting one to the other into a form that I think will combine into a good color representation. Some of this is based on experience, and some of this a little bit by the seat of my pants. Using the channel combination tool, we combine those three images into our first SHO color image, which has the strong green balance due to the strong HA contribution in the SHO mapping. To remove that green balance, we're going to use the SCNR tool on green with a 75% removal of the green. With that done, we now have some magenta biases in there that we'd like to remove. The way I've been dealing with this recently is to simply invert the image. Now the areas that are magenta look green, and we know how to remove green balances. We're going to apply the SCNR green 75% removal just like we did the first time. We're going to apply to this image. Finally, when we invert that image, we see that we have actually a pretty good looking color balance, and it's a good starting point for the rest of our color processing. Our next step is to go starless, and to do that I'm using the Star Exterminator tool, and I've created a starless version of the image, and I've also created a star only version of the image. These are our color stars. Normally I take the stars from the Luminance image, but I was thinking about trying to get a little bit of color in the stars, so I think I may try that with the SHO stars version and use that to fold in later on. Now to process the images further, I want to create a series of color masks that I'll apply and allow me in a very specific and targeted fashion to manipulate the colors of the image. The first one I'm going to do is a blue mask, and I'm going to use the color mask script tool to create it. Next, I'll apply a boost to that mask to accentuate it a bit using the histogram tool. Finally, I'll smooth that out with the convolution tool. Next, we'll create a green mask using the color script tool. Again, we'll boost that with the histogram tool a bit. And finally, we'll smooth that out with the convolution tool. The final mask I'm going to create is for yellow, and I'll create it in the same way as I created the others. And just like the others, I'll boost it a bit with the histogram tool. And finally, I'll smooth it out with the convolution tool. Now I have my three color masks. I can begin to apply them one by one, and I can do an adjustment with the curves tool. First, I apply the blue color mask, and then I do some adjustments with the curves tool. When I say the curves tool, I'm likely to be changing the overall neutral tone scale for those parts of the image with that color. I'm likely to be looking at adjusting the actual color curves and the saturation curve to get the effect that I want. Now I'll do the same kind of adjustment with the green mask. And finally, another round of adjustments using the yellow mask. At this point, I have the color position pretty much where I'd like it. Now I have to worry about the noise of the image. I want this image to be very smooth. So I'm looking at a zoomed in portion of the image, and this is before I've done an application of the noise exterminator. And when I do apply it, I'm going to be fairly aggressive in that application. Now with that being applied, you can see that I have a very smooth looking image here, and the noise is well controlled. This then is my final version of the color SHO starless image. I'm pretty happy with the color I'm seeing here. I think noise is very well managed. Now the question is, which version of the Luminance image, when folded in, will create the best image? So now we'll create two new versions of the image. We'll start with a common color image. We'll take each version of the L starless version, and we're going to combine them using the LRGB combination tool. First we have the aggressive version of the L starless folded into the color, and as we can see here, pretty much what we saw before. It is a very sharp, detailed image, but maybe not looking quite natural when you look at the background especially. And here's the version using the more selective L starless. To my eye, this looks more pleasing, looks more natural and more photographic. We're going to take one further step to compare them. I'm going to fold the stars back into both in the same way, and then we can look at each image side by side and make a decision as to which one we like better. Now side by side, we can look at two images in what looks to be almost a finished form. And to my eye, I still like the selective one better. I think it looks a lot more natural. I like the level of detail we've brought out. I like the fact that we haven't accentuated some of the background noise, which there's really no need to do. And here we have the final version of my image. Obviously a little bit more processing has been done to bring it to its final state, but I did choose to use the L starless version that had more selective processing.
Well, that was kind of a fun experiment to play with. What did I learn from it? Well, I wanted to see if you could get a more detailed and sharper image if you were more aggressive in your Luminance image processing. And in fact, you can, but you can take that so far that the image no longer looks natural or pleasing, at least not to my eye. And I would certainly not be happy with those particular results. On the other hand, when I was more selective in creating the Luminance image, I thought I created something much more natural, and I was much more pleased with the final result that I got. I think the primary learning there is that these are all photographic images, and to the extent that you can preserve the natural look in each of them while still maximizing some of the detail you're trying to go after, I think that's an important constraint when you're trying to end up with a final image that you're happy with. I hope you found this video interesting, and I thank you for watching. Please subscribe to the channel and ring the bell. That way you won't miss any new content. As always, your comments and questions, both on this channel and on my webpage, are welcome. Stay tuned for new imaging projects, which should be completed in the weeks ahead. Signing off, this is Patrick Cosgrove from Cosgrove's Cosmos. I hope you have clear nights and great seeing.